Hello there, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Metagame, the live streaming show right here where we not only talk about board games, but sometimes we talk about talking about board games. Hence the meta version of the metagame. It's play on words. I'm your host, Chaz Marler, but as always, I am not here alone. I am joined by the live the live YouTube chat, who's going to be posting some things. And as soon as I get a confirmation from our live streaming YouTube chat that they can see and hear me okay, that I have all of my plugs plugged and connectors connected correctly, then we will start the programming. While I wait for that, I just want to say hello there, chat window. You can't see, but I'm actually waving at the chat window for some reason. So what we're going to be talking about today is the potential video gamification of board games. And what exactly does that mean? Well, what that means is how our analog hobby is it destined? Is it fate for it, like so many other things in this world, to become more and more of a virtual digital experience? And so what I have is a few questions and bullet points that I want to go over and present to the chat. And usually what I do is I kind of present things and then talk about it a little bit and then go over to the chat. But today, I think I'm going to do things a little bit reversey. I'm going to just present the topics, go some questions and whatnot, then go over to the chat and then follow up with my own thoughts on it afterwards. I think we'll kind of flip it a little bit there. I think that'll work. So let me not stall any longer. Let me get us jumping right in to this topic about the gamification of something that's not that topic, the video gamification of board games. All right. I have 3 main points to talk about today. So let's start with number 1, which is essentially, let's just talk about how a board game can be implemented as a video game. There's several different ways. There are basically a digital version of a board game, such as an app, like the Ticket to Ride app, or an app you'd play on your iPad or phone or something like that. Basically just an app that recreates the board game experience as realistically or as closely as possible. Then you have some other video gamifications of board games in online platforms that allow you to play the board game, but not necessarily letting the computer control it, basically giving you the foundation, giving you the platform to work with. Some examples of this would be online platforms like Tabletopia, Board Game Arena, and Tabletop Simulator. And the third kind of way the digital stuff is implemented, I don't really know if it fits into today's discussion topic, but it's basically companion apps. Like the Mage Wars Spellbook Maker, or the Sheriff of Nottingham app that counts up your scores for you, or the apps that go along with XCOM and Alchemists, which may or may not be required to play certain board games, but especially in the case of Alchemist, are greatly highly encouraged to give you the full board gaming experience. Have that companion app running alongside the board game. So, okay. So the with these apps and online platforms and whatnot, the first main question for all of you guys is, do video games like those that play as board games and whatnot, do those actually qualify as being board games? Let's make that differentiation right here, right up front. For example, for those of you who track your board game plays in BoardGameGeek.com? Do you track your statistics for your online plays in BGG? Or do you ignore those? Let's start there and mold the conversation like the finely tuned piece of marble that it virtually is. And we'll see where it goes from there. So let's start by going over to the chat and kind of catching up to where everyone jumped on board. And if you are following along and would like to participate in the chat, it is simple, easy, and completely possible to do by simply adding the hashtag TMG for the metagame to your post that you post in the chat. If this is your first time joining us, there's lots of regulars in the chat, but I don't want this to feel like a little closed club. Everyone, even first-time viewers, are welcome to join in with their comments and everything like that in the chat. Simply add the hashtag to it, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my web browser's search tool, and I'm going to search for that hashtag in the chat window, which is going to make all the little chat statements that have that hashtag kind of highlighted, so they'll kind of bubble up to the top, and that's the ones that I will catch first. Speaking of which, I'll do that now. I'm going to do my little search, and I'll spell it correctly so it actually shows up. And it looks like we have about 20 or so comments here to start with. So let's see what people are saying today. And the first people that are saying things, the first people who joins us to say something is our friend of the show, Kabuki Kid. Chat log regular and like I said, friend of the show. Kabuki starts us off with some general thoughts about the video gamification of board games, saying, I think that we will definitely see more apps incorporated into board games, but I can't imagine it will ever take over everything completely. It works for certain types of games, but not easily for all. The apps seem to work best when it's running some sort of AI and or doing a lot of the bookkeeping. And I think like I mentioned, the Sheriff of Nottingham score calculation app and XCOM and Alchemists are definitely examples of what Kabuki is saying here. Apps that take care of a lot of the bookkeeping. And I think that is an excellent way for apps to plug in to a board game. Oh, pardon the pun. There's another big game that came out last year that incorporated an app just beautifully in their second edition. First edition of the game had no app. Second edition of the game introduced an app, and everyone has been raving about how much this app improves their gameplay experience by handling a lot of the bookkeeping. I would be surprised if this game is not already mentioned in the chat by someone. So instead of me going into it now, let's just continue with the chat, and I'm sure it'll pop up in just sooner rather than later. And the next comment comes from friend of the show, Toyota Wolf, who agrees with Kabuki by saying, I agree with Kabuki. A mixture of apps with board games does work well, but video games are too... He actually has ... so I'll have to represent that this way. Video games are too detached, and as such, I have a better experience with board games. Additionally, only one person has to own a copy of the board game usually to play, unlike video games. That's a good point right there. Is that, well, actually, let me try and shoot. I agree with you, Toyota, but let me try to shoot holes in that. Because not all board games are created equal, or I should say all tabletop games. I'm thinking of the standard board games, sure. But what about this recent hot game that's sweeping the nation called Star Wars Destiny, in which players have to go and collect a bunch of cards and dice, whether they want to or not, and what you have to do, though, is every player has to go and track down those things, just like any CCG or TCG, mostly CCGs. Each player has to go out and obtain their own copy of the game and its components. So that is an example of where not necessarily just one person has to own the game. In case of CCGs, everybody's got to go out and get a copy of the game. And we know that it's not necessarily a hindrance to people getting into the game, because games like Magic the Gathering, still to this day, are the games that keep lots of game shops up and running. It's the core product that sustains some of these shops. So we know it still sells. So again, I don't disagree with your comment, but just for discussion's sake, are there other examples of board games other than CCGs where it's necessary for more than one person to own it? I can't think of any off the top of my head. I think that's kind of a stretch. It's definitely not the norm. But there you go with video games. The other way to try and blow holes in your argument is talking about online platforms such as Tabletopia, stuff like that, which is the online platform I have the most experience with. I know that I'm pretty sure. I believe that it's possible that if there is someone who has a paid account to some of these online platforms for board games, I believe most of them are set up in such a way that only one person has to have the paid account. Oh yeah, an example of this is I played 8 Minute Empire Legends on Tabletopia a couple of weeks ago. And it's one of their premium games that you have to have a higher paid account to actually go in and be able to play. And I don't. I have just a regular account, so I couldn't play the game. But of the 3 players that were playing the game, one of the 3 of us had the paid account, was able to unlock and set up the game and host it. And then the other 2 of us were able to join, which means that it's set up in such a way, similar to the physical product, only one person present at the virtual table has to have bought the game or invested money in it. And the others were able to join that person for free. If I couldn't host it on my own, with my free account or my whatever my account is, a non-premium account. But being there with someone who has the premium account, who has bought the game, I'm able to get in. So maybe the video game world is starting to see that and come around. I don't know if other platforms are similar or other video game experiences are similar, but perhaps the two are converging, we're coming closer to converging in that respect. So anyway, that's a really good aspect of kind of the conversation there, though Toyota. And he wraps up with another statement saying, Toyota says that I got the app for Pathfinder Adventure card game and Sentinels of the Multiverse, and honestly, I prefer the app over the board game due to the setup of the fiddly components and mechanisms in the game. And Sentinels of the Multiverse especially, there's one that, yes, I've heard that again and again, where similar to other games where the app handles a lot of bookkeeping and makes the game easier, the Sentinels of the Multiverse app handles all that bookkeeping stuff, which lets the people get into the game a lot more. So again, too, this might actually bring us to our second question, but I'm going to zoom through some more comments before we fully transfer over. So let's catch up on our chat a little bit more here first. All right. Let's see here. Sorry. We have Toyota actually, though, posted one more thing, which actually gets into our next... he does continue to segue into our next question. So why don't I just start spoilering that next question first? Toyota mentions as well that he doesn't think board game apps will necessarily cannibalize the market for regular analog physical cardboard board games, because sometimes they actually help you to see how certain rules are supposed to be played. Finally. which is a really good point. And again, I'm going to put that aside for a minute there, Toyota, because that's the next major point which I'm going to come back to in a moment. But first, it's Brian's turn. Brian joins us and says a couple of posts here, which would start out by saying that Brian thinks very few video games feel like board games at all to me. And the ones that do almost always were board games first. For the hybrid games, I like the Mansions of Madness 2nd edition. Ta-da! Thank you, Brian. I knew 5, 6, 7 comments in, and there it is, the Mansions of Madness 2nd edition, the game that I was hoping would be mentioned. It was only a matter of time, which we'll get to more of in a second. But first, more Brian. Brian continues, the Mansions of Madness 2nd edition was done really well, but I'm usually not a fan of companion apps, such as the Sentinels one, which tracks damage and stuff like that, because Brian feels that it just doesn't integrate well. Interesting. That is very interesting. Let's talk about one that people do say integrates well, and that is the Mansions of Madness 2nd edition companion app. First edition of Mansions of Madness, there had to be a dedicated player, kind of almost running the part of a GM, setting up the game, setting up all the tiles, managing everything. And if they did one little error during the setup process, the whole game was skewed and went akimbo and just was ruined. Well, the Mansions of Madness 2nd edition, the app itself takes the place of that game master and allows all the players to participate in the game as investigators, and it leads the story and has just been getting rave reviews in the quality of its integration with the game. So I think that the integration, Brian, my follow-up question, I'm assuming the answer, but correct me if I'm wrong. When you talk about the integration, it's not an overall cumbersomeness with the app. It's not like having the iPad or the app running is too much of a different environment than the board game, that it just doesn't, it's like oil and water. It sounds more that you're saying that it can vary on an app by app basis. That like Sentinels of the Multiverse app doesn't integrate very well for you, but the Mansions of Madness one does smoothly integrate right in and works with a seamless integration. Is there anyone out there who has tried multiple apps and just none of them, they've always been a distraction to the gameplay experience? Is there anyone out there that's just said, no, I'll never use an app because I've tried and every single time it just pulls me out of the game and I hate it. I detest it. I can't stand it. It makes me sad. If there's anyone out there that's had that experience, let me know in the old chat or the comments below after this video is posted. Okay, so let's touch on the thing that Toyota kind of started touching on, is that the second major point, and then we'll continue with more chatification here. The second major point is that some board game publishers are embracing app development. And other board game publishers have expressed concerns that the development of an app version of your physical board game will cannibalize the sales of your actual physical product and actually be a detriment. And again, this varies from one publisher to the next. In fact, just this morning, not more than 20 minutes or so before the show started, interestingly, Ignacy Chevicek from Portal Games posted this tweet that he had a meeting today with the guy who's going to design the AI for an upcoming Tides of Time app. And Ignacy says he didn't understand a word of what the developer was saying, but he assumes that that's probably a good sign then. So there we go. There's There's Portal Games. There's Portal Games embracing app development for Tides of Time, which is a game where they already have two titles in that line of the game. So Now, with the windows that I was supposed to keep open but closed to show that, here we go. The windows would have more notes for me to follow up on, including the question of what do you guys think? Well, like I said, I'm going to save my thoughts for the end there. But what I want to know is, do you? It's a two-part question here. Do you think and feel that the digital version of board game apps cannibalize physical board game sales? Do you think they do or don't? And the second part of that is, regardless of what you think and feel, what has your experience been with what you've done with your wallet? Has the purchase of an app version of a board game actually prevented you from buying the physical version, or even whet your appetite to cause you to go scoop up that physical version? Has the app version had any effect whatsoever on your purchase decision for a game? That's something I'm very, very curious about. And hopefully we'll get some people responding to that question. But the only way to do that is to continue through the chat and work our way there. So this thing we now then do, which with the next post by FSZKVF, who I believe told me once how to pronounce it correctly, and I have forgotten. So I apologize, because I just should have written it down on my hand, but I didn't. But anyway, mentions that I don't play video games. Not a one. Oh, he didn't say not a one, but I'm adding. Actually, I'm going to add nary a one. So Physics plays nary a video game. Not at all. Because, continues, I don't like them, primarily because I'm terrible at them. So at least for me, let's have a good, honest reason there. At least for me, there is not replacing a board game with their video counterpart. So there we have the amount of self-perceived skill level between the video game version and the board game version is making someone's decision into which one they go. That is interesting. That's the first approach of that. That's the first time I've heard someone with that reason and rationale. That's really, really interesting. I would be also curious to find out if there is any game that you've played, both the board game physical version and the digital version. How has your performance varied? How different was your performance in the video version versus the tabletop version? Let me know if you're floating around still. Toyota continues though, saying that however, there are exceptions to every rule, and Tharsis is a horrible stab at trying to make a board game / dice game into a video game. Tharsis, Tharsis. I'm not familiar with that one. Especially, the reason why, he says, especially since it doesn't exist as a real game. Oh, that's why. Only as a VG. Okay, interesting. That's definitely good. That's actually a good point, is that I wonder if certain components lend themselves more to being made into an app. A game that I thought the app would never work is the app version of Colt Express, because Colt Express is this 3D train that sits on the table and you're moving people around in the train. But at its heart, it's a programming game, and the app has been getting pretty good reviews. So I guess, what's nice is the programming aspect of Colt Express is what carries that game, and not just the toy factor of the 3D game. So that's cool that the app seems to be being received well. It surprised me a little bit, but I guess it shouldn't have. Homemaker Hobbies joins us to mention, I don't really like playing video games, so I will always prefer the actual game. I rarely play the game apps that I have. I like the social interaction that board games provide. That's a really good point too. And I think that I am in the same boat as you, floating along on our sea of board game media and whatnots here. Because I am the same way. And again, I'm wondering how universal this is for board gamers. When I first got an iPad, hello iPad, a few years ago, I went and loaded it up with board game apps. Thinking, this is so cool. I can play board games on the go and just always have kind of a game available to me. And I think over the last, I don't know, it's 3-4 years now since I've loaded this iPad up with board game apps, I've played maybe 3. And I'm not talking about I've played 3 different games. I think I've maybe opened up a board game app 3 times. And so it's just, I think I see what you're saying there, Homemaker Hobbies. I rarely play the game apps as well, just because it is, to me, a different enough experience that it's just not what I go for when I'm going for something on the iPad. If I'm grabbing my iPad to play a quick game, currently I'm going to go and try to play something a little bit quicker and more arcade-like, I think, and try and reclaim my title at Everwing, which will be mine again. But that's another topic for another discussion group. Let's go and continue with our chat here with Brian, who mentions that though one type I would like to see in all of this is something like a quote-unquote smart table. A smart table that functions as the board and pieces. Keeps the cards, the dice, etc. all analog. Maybe something like for TI3, Twilight Imperium 3rd Edition. I'm not 100% sure of the idea, but it's something that I would love to see tried. Just as a quick aside, Brian, I would love to see that too. I think there's a lot of us that would. In the early 2000s and such, one of my local friends and everything, when we would get together every week, we would spend hours each week talking about how awesome it would be to have a big table-sized, flat, touchscreen environment set up for board gaming. And so, yeah, I know there's people out there just like you and me, Brian, that have longed for the day to have something like that. And, it's one of those things where if enough people have it in mind, I'm hopeful that it will exist sometime soon. It would be way cool. Okay, Toyota also mentions that they have tons like that hitting the market, Brian. Ooh, maybe this is follow-up information for what Brian and I were just discussing. However, Toyota mentions the unfortunate part is, of course, the cost and the size of them. They are small, but still ridiculously priced. That is a good point. That was always what was prohibitive to my friend and I really getting excited about it. Was like when the first Microsoft Surface things came out. They were tens of thousands of dollars back then. Of course, they've come down, but they are still quite price prohibitive and usually proprietary. So you'll get like 3 games maybe, and then it just is a dead end when you need something that just runs normal iOS or something like that. This also mentions, I think there's a long way to go for apps applied to board games. All of the buzzing going on there was for the Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition app was, in Physic's opinion, unjustified. Ooh. He continues, it helps with some things, sure, but still, from a replayability and experience overall, the app that you mentioned... Oh, wait. Sorry, that started a new thought. An experience overall, end of statement. I've got to say... and I'll be completely honest here. I'm not disagreeing with you, just for conversation's sake. I will admit that is the first time that I have heard someone who has played the Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition with the app say that they feel it was unjustified. Very, very interesting. You made very good reasons why. I still find it very, very interesting. I can definitely see the replayability. And I can see the replayability aspect becoming a side conversation, if not argument, that people branch off and really geek out about and have a heated conversation about with both sides. I'm not going to get into all of that. I will say from a replayability standpoint, I think that the app does randomize some things, so that if you've played the same scenario multiple times, there are things about it that will be different, which is cool. Also, one potential upside of a companion app like the Mansions of Madness is that relatively inexpensive expansions in the form of downloadable content could be released for these apps to hopefully provide some longevity to them without breaking the bank. However, time will tell and we'll see. You know what else we'll see? We'll see the next comment, which is also physics, which I thought was a continuation, but is not, because it's a new idea, and that idea is as follows. The apps that you mentioned, the ones that are actually the game themselves, those are good for solo gaming, and those I like. That makes sense. I can see the standalone app versions of games being preferable. Totally fair. Here we have a little cluster of comments. First from Toyota, who mentions the XCOM app. In XCOM, yes, you need the app and you cannot play without it. That is a good point and something that we should clarify. I mentioned XCOM before, along with other highly integrated apps like the one for Alchemists. Alchemists this app is technically optional. You have to have a dedicated person kind of doing everything the app does. But yes, XCOM is the first one I knew of in which the app is a necessity. You cannot play XCOM without that app. I think Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition, it's also required. Correct me if I'm wrong there, though. Chat log, keep me in check. But until then, let's continue on with Kabuki, who mentions, so far, the apps I find the most useful are the ones like One Night Ultimate Werewolf, where it does the opening narration and then acts as a timer for the group and kind of leads you through the game that way. I think that's a really excellent integration of an app, and one that I'm glad someone mentioned is the apps for the One Night series. Because that just guides you through the game, lets the players still play, but basically does a lot of that bookkeeping that would require another player to remove themselves from the game to do. When you don't have to remove a player from the game anymore, that makes it really, really nice. And two more quick notes before I run out of the first cluster that my search tool found. From Brian, who just mentions the XCOM or Alchemists. He says, I'm more okay with that than scoring apps and such, as far as companion apps. So I think that was clarification on something I asked about earlier. So thank you, Brian. That's awesome. And Toyota mentions, we're getting into the hardcore stuff about my question about if you track your app plays in BGG. Toyota mentions, I, for one, don't track plays on apps in my BGG stats. So let me pop back to my own notes about that real quick, since we're kind of there and we're at the halfway point through the show and my search tool just ran out of searches and I got to research. Let's talk about that. I'm in a similar vein. I and a lot of people I know track our board game plays on using Board Game Geek's tracking stats. And what's interesting is that when I play a game that is when I play an app version of a game, with some of the few that I do, like Ascension or even Star Realms, which was hot for a while, I never recorded the plays of the apps in my BGG stats. And I never really thought about it for a while until one day it's like, oh, wait a minute. I've played this a few times as the app, but never bothered to record it because it just didn't feel right to me. And a couple of friends of mine, we were at a convention and we were talking about this, and they all mentioned as well, as they were taking out their phones to record the game that we just played, they all mentioned as well that actually, we don't record app plays either. And we were all kind of like, that's interesting. But then the plot thickened because just a few weeks ago, some of those same people and I were playing some games on Tabletopia. And we recorded those plays in our BGG stats. And it was interesting that they were both digital versions of the games, but just the fact that the playing the app version, where it's a little more of our arcade mode, a little more of, playing that versus Tabletopia, which is more of just a virtual gaming environment, platform that allows the players to come in, sit around a virtual table, and control the game themselves and play it. That little mental difference flipped a switch that caused not only myself, but all of us to just instinctually, independently, each choose to record those plays in BGG. And so I'm wondering if there's, what is it about the difference? Is it just that, the players are more in control of the scoring and the rules instead of the computer? Or is it something more about the social environment of Tabletopia, where you're kind of sitting around that virtual table? So that's, I think that's where we kind of segued into where we left off in the chat. So before I go into my third point, let me go back to the chat and see where it's at. Let's see. We have Fisk not being good at video games. Buzz, the Buzzy Buzz one. Oh, and XCOM. Here we are. Brian says, speaking of tracking, Brian says, I am very inconsistent on tracking, but might count an app if, and that is in caps, okay? So really, really a big if I am playing with other people. Solo app play, I wouldn't track. That's a good point. Perhaps that is the X factor I was missing. Perhaps it was that we were all playing the Tabletopia game together instead of the apps. Perhaps that is playing with other people. You may have just hit the nail that I completely missed right on the head. Let's continue on and see if others concur. Ryan stops by to potentially concur with the statement that I suppose app versions count as board games. Sure. But, I'm also very careful about believing I know how to play a game that I've only played the app version of, because apps automate so many things. Interesting. So, if I'm understanding that correctly, Ryan, that someone earlier mentioned how they like the apps because it helps teach them the game where they might not have known, and the game knows all the rules. The app knows all the rules, so it lets them kind of finalize how they learn the game. Sounds to me you're flipping that around a little bit on its head, saying that since the app automates so much, you walk away from an app actually not feeling confident that you know all the rules of the game, and you don't think you could confidently go and play the analog version. That is interesting. The automation, yeah, that does make sense, and I can see that. I trying to think of my own experience there, and I guess I just don't have enough board game app experience because, like I said, I don't play them as often. But I'd be interested to see how. It'd be interesting if anyone else has had that similar experience. Are apps not as good teachers of games as they could be? Because I would have expected they would have been. So thank you, Ryan. That is an interesting question that you bring up. Ooh. Let me know how the other people feel. In the meantime, here's another comment from Homemaker Hobbies, who says, I have a very important question. Ooh. Homemaker Hobbies' very important question is this. How do you feel about... Okay, the 39-minute mark. I have to remember that. The 39-minute mark of this show is what I need to bookmark later. Homemaker Hobbies asks a very important question. How do you feel about cleaning your room and eating your vegetables? And I have to say to Homemaker Hobbies and to anyone else listening, young or old, there is nothing more important in life than obeying your parents faithfully and earnestly and promptly when they request that you clean your room and eat your vegetables. You do those two things, and the world will open up opportunities that you have never even imagined. So, there you go. There's the answer to your very important question there, homemaker hobbies. Thank you, everyone else, for allowing me to indulge in that. Like I say, when I'm putting together a video, sometimes the little stingers in the captions or at the end of the credits or something, like I always tell myself, there's no such thing as an inside joke that's too much of an inside joke. You could always push it further. But for now, let's push on with the current topic that we have with Pith's Attic, who joins us again to say that my smartphone apparently has a very limited capacity to install apps on. So, if I read a game has an app, it's a pass for me. Interesting. So there, your available technology is actually a determining factor that has prevented you from buying some games that integrate apps. That is a factor of this conversation that I had not thought of before, and I have not, of other publishers and stuff I know I've never heard come up before as well. That is an interesting thing. Be interested to know, for you or anyone else in that same boat, how long has that been a factor? And with continual inevitable upgrades in technology, how long do you estimate that to continue being a factor? Forever? Or within the next couple of years, is that going to change and it's not going to matter anymore? I'd be interested to know that as well, because that is definitely, like I said, a factor of this whole conversation that I haven't heard come up before. Awesome. Okay, let's take a few more and then we'll get to the third point here for the third half of the show. Gazensha joins us again. Gazensha Fox says, I don't think video games will take over from board games. Since iPhone came around, board games have been getting more and more of an uptake, suggesting instead that a portion of the board game audience are playing to avoid looking at screens. That is a fantastic point about all of this. That's one of those things that I wonder sometimes if it's just me. I work on the computer all day, and some days you sit at the screens for 10 hours or more, and when I get done, there are days I just want to unplug and not look at any sort of screen. And board games offer an excellent escape away from those screens. And I've always wondered if am I the only person that feels that way? Am I the only person that is one of the reasons why I enjoy board games? But it sounds like perhaps there are others that feel that way too. And if you are one of those people, let me know in the comments below, because it's always neat to see more things that are a common bond between us tabletop board gamers. Very cool. Gazensha also continues saying that while hybrids like Mansions of Madness are great for what they're doing, I don't think that they're the quote-unquote future of board games, but instead a new hybrid medium. I hope you're right there, Gazensha. I hope you're right, and time will tell how much the future will bring further integration of apps and devices into our games. Kabuki mentions that I'm not much of an app gamer. I have some games on my phone, sure, including some board game apps, but I never play them. I seem to have them just, quote-unquote, just in case. And exactly. That's just in case if I'm stuck somewhere for hours and I'm desperate, just in case and there's something to do. Absolutely, that has been my experience as well. Toyota, referring back, I believe, to our previous comment about CCGs, and how they require investment from multiple people playing them instead of just the one person who's hosting the game. Toyota has a simple solution to that issue, saying, quote, CCGs, I usually just stay away from them. A simple solution, cutting off the problem before it begins. You are a wiser individual than I. Okay, let's take a couple of more comments, and then I'll introduce the third and final topic, and we'll do the lightning round and try to get through as many comments as we can. Thank you so much for joining me and commenting so much, everybody. This is what makes the show work. Randy, who joins us. Hello, Randy. Randy says, I would probably record app plays, sure. Although I very rarely have played apps that are based on board games. I use them more as a try before you buy. Ho ho! Interesting. And that kind of ties into the whole question of if the apps affect your purchase decision for the physical version of the board games. Randy is actually using them as a litmus test to see if the physical version is something he wants to invest in, which is encouraging to the health of the tabletop industry. Awesome. Rusted Beetle joins us to have a two-part post here. Rusted Beetle says that I, for one, welcome our app bookkeeping overlords. I have a preference for digital AI over card deck AI, as I find digital AI to be more flexible and responsive. However, there's a twist. However, I would not want a severe proliferation of apps in board games. Just as I prefer physical books over ebooks, I still prefer boards to digital. Good point. I think there's a consensus for that, Rusted Beetle. But here's my follow-up question to you. Do you think that feeling, that opinion that you and many of us, I believe, share is a generational thing? Do you think that as apps are becoming more prevalent in board games and everything, that the next generation of players will twist that around and prefer the digital implementation into their games, increasing the amount of technology and ease of some bookkeeping? Could it be that in another 15 years or so that a non-digital implementation of a board game is the one that is no longer preferred? I think I said that right. Is it possible that in 15 years only the digital versions will be the preferred ones? Well, that still wasn't much clearer. Do you think what I think in that respect of the future of the gaming? Let me know. First, let me know if you can figure it out, and then let me know what you think. In the meantime, I will try to be less embarrassed, and I'll continue on with 3 more little quotes, or 2 more, and then we'll get to the third little thing, and we'll wrap up the show here. Mike Jones, no really, and that is the whole thing is his avatar name. Mike Jones, no really, says, I don't see video games taking over board games, but I do see them as an alternative to those who may not have the space. Oh, that's a very good point. Space issues. May not have the space or want to devote the energy dealing with board games and the extra effort therein. That's a very good point. And I think that that's one of the reasons why board game apps, I think, do have a place in our hobby and in our industry, because not everyone is a collector. Not everyone wants to have one wall in their house devoted to board games and have this collection that they can enjoy in lots of different ways. Some people just want to play games, and that's fine. But and so lots of times people are like that want to just get to the games will actually either focus on or have a lot of games they just pick as just the digital and instead of the analog. So that's a really good point there, Mike Jones. Really, it is. Okay, let's continue on with Michael, who mentions something we haven't talked about yet, and that is miniature games, which require each player to own it as well. That's a good point. He gives examples of X-Wing, an Armada. If you want to skirmish in an Imperial Assault, Blood Bowl, Warhammer, etc., investment in the product for all those miniature games is going to be required. That's a very good point too, is we haven't even gone into miniature games, and that's a whole nother potato that has some digital implementations, and also with the how much do you have to invest in and how much does each player have to invest in. So really good points right there. Okay, 2 more quotes here, and then I'll see what I can do with stuff. Michael mentions, no, that was what we just read. Pith comes by and also mentions a question. Excuse me. Actually, you know what? Pith, I'm going to skip over your question real quick. I'm going to go to Randy real quick, who says, if I ever actually play something on Tabletopia or Board Game Arena, I would, yes, also prefer probably log the play. So there we go. Another person where for some reason the virtual tabletop experience environment causes them to log the play versus the app. Interesting. Actually, you didn't mention the app, so I'm just assuming. Correct me if I'm wrong. Back to Pith, who says, Chaz, what kind of apps would you like to be incorporated in your new microwave? The time travel app seems nice, but I heard it has some major bugs. And the reason I put yours last is so that put yours at the end of that section is so that I can not respond to it and go back to the chat. But as for app, an app to just to answer your question, an app that would perfectly cook a burrito instead of making the ends really hard while the center sometimes is still icy. An app for my microwave that could do that would be the number one app that I would invest in. I would pay, we're talking about apps, I'd pay $6.99 for that app. $6.99 I would pay for that app. Yeah. Okay. We're quickly running out of time. So I just wanted to mention the third point, which is something we've actually kind of touched on briefly, so that's okay. But then the third question was essentially, do board game apps cannibalize the board game market? And maybe that was the second one. For example, here's something that came up a while ago, is that apps can be seen as something that will either cannibalize sales of the physical product or help build brand awareness. That's the points of view that I've seen from different publishers. Some of them see it as a companion that builds brand awareness. Some of them see it as I think it's going to prevent revenue coming in from the physical sales of the physical games. So do you think that electronic adaptations of board games as apps are complementary or cannibalistic? And just as a kind of a perspective here too, how much of an investment can an app be for some of these publishers? Well, I actually I was fortunate enough that there is actually in the town I live in, there's several actual software development companies, especially video game software developers. And I discussed app development sorry, let me get my notes so I can say this correctly. I discussed app development with a local app development company in the city I live in. They also develop and manage Facebook games as well. So they are kind of a high-end, long-term game developer. They mentioned that developing an app for a unique intellectual property, the cost for the development of this app can be in the range of $500,000 to $2 million to develop app. Now, this is a higher end app. These are some of the games, some of the Facebook games and stuff like that. You know, you got your Farmvilles, you got your City Girls, you got your stuff like that. These big apps. So, you know, there is definitely a difference in the scope of some of these. But app development can still be a substantial investment. I believe Playdeck is a company that does a lot of popular board game apps. And I know Playdeck is one of the premium board game developers. So with that level of investment, I can definitely see why some publishers are hesitant to put that money into app development, fearing that it could actually cause them to lose physical sales in the long run. My opinion on that, I'm more of the I'm more of the vein that board game apps are complementary, but again, I can still appreciate the risk involved in developing it. Okay, let's get back to the chat and let's enter the lightning round. And let's see how many of these we can get through to make sure that everyone's comments we touch on as many comments as possible. So let's continue. Let's go back to Michael, who says that I play Ascension. I play Ascension and Star Realm apps regularly. I have Pandemic, Lords of Waterdeep. Ooh, Lords of Waterdeep, that's a good one. And some others that I only play occasionally. Ascension is nice because it reduces the setup time. That is absolutely true. About the setup time. I don't know how I hit my monitor. I apologize that I moved everything. But yeah, I think that is one of the reasons I was drawn to Ascension too, is there's so much less shuffling when you play on the Ascension app. Gazentia mentions, video games that play like board games are often doing subtle little things that board games can't do easily. Hearthstone's arbitrary random targets, for example. That's a very good point. Excuse me. I think also it seems more and more app developers are trying to make the board game app be less of a one-to-one analog of the board game and more of a new experience that's based on the rule set of the board game. So it feels more like you're playing a video game instead of playing just a board game app. I've seen that. I'm hoping that trend continues as well. And that kind of goes along with that, Gazentia. But again, lightning round must continue with these. Gazentia follows up the comment saying, for the video game versus board game, one versus many owner model, part of the discussion, it's standard for consoles and local multiplayer to need only one owner. Oh, good point. And it's rare for online multiplayer to let non-owners join on the fun. Very good point. Thank you. It's really interesting to see how these different industries treat this stuff similarly, and also just have these mental barriers where they always treat things differently from each other. So very good. Gazentia also mentions, because apparently couldn't resist, that maybe if Chaz gets that new microwave that he's been searching for and working towards for so long, he could use it as a timer for games like Escape, Curse of the Temple. Deal. Next time I'm making like some minute rice or something, that takes 10 minutes to cook, I'm breaking out Curse of the Temple and I'm using the microwave. You know what? That might actually be a good like stretch goal or something for the fundraiser, to have a microwave-based game of Escape, Curse of the Temple. You've given me incredibly dangerous ideas, you guys. Let's continue on and see how many more ideas we can get on the table before we run out of time. Sindane joins us once again. Hello, it's been a while. Sindane mentions, I think I could make an argument that some people have wanted to video gamify board games with VCR and DVD games. Ooh, good point. There we have the technology of 30 and 20 years ago here. Definitely is an avenue that a lot of game developers tried to tap with mixed results. But yeah, I could follow that argument as well, Sindane, that the VCR and DVD board games could be the earlier versions of video gamification of our tabletop games. Touché. Good point. Toyota, this doesn't have the hashtag, but Toyota mentions that today Brian gets the prize, and Brian responds, yay. Okay, so let's continue on to the next comments. You guys. It says, earlier than that even, chess AIs, Dark Towers Monolith, etc. That's true. How far back does this rabbit hole actually go with the video gamification of board games? You're right. Perhaps it does go back farther than even the VCR and the DVD. We may have to explore that further in another episode. For now, I'm going to try and get through like 10 more comments in 2 minutes. So let's do this now. Starting with Gazentia, who says, I'd say the Mansions of Madness companion app integrates about as well as Mice and Mystics campaign/storybook. As such, I don't want to see that approach for every game, but sure, it's a valid option. And Toyota mentions that Descent 2.0's companion app, which, that's right, that's true. Descent 2.0's companion app is a beautiful implementation, and I hope they do it for Imperial Assault soon as well. That's right, and I believe the Descent 2.0 companion app, that's relatively, in terms of the longevity of Descent, that's relatively new on the scene, isn't it? But good to hear it is a beautiful implementation. Brian beautifully writes that I don't really consider the Mansions of Madness app as a companion app, as it is an essential component of the game. It feels like it's a part of the game. The ones that you manually input data, those apps, the ones that you manually input data, but it doesn't affect game feel superfluously. Okay, now are you guys just typing in words that are going to be difficult for me to pronounce? Because really, that's not fair. Okay, but Brian, I butchered your comment, but I think I see your point, and it's appreciated. But I'm going to continue on and see if I can read through the rest of the comments without butchering them as much. Challenge accepted. Gazencha says, I also think that companion/storybooks still have their place. Less need to swap between the app and the physical, but less delicious stuff like sounds and things like that. Good point. The amount of immersion that you can get with these will vary based on the way the app is integrated. Mike Jones, no really, seconds that by saying, I'll second that. The Descent app is amazing. I just wish it did the rules interpretation. Oh man, if they had an app that did Descent line of sight, well, that app alone would be worth another $6.99 along with the Burrito app. Definitely agree, Mike Jones. Brian mentions, I'm really looking forward to seeing how the app works for First Martians. Oh my word, yes. That's one of the big app games coming out this year is I hope that the First Martians app works the way that everyone is hoping that it works, and guiding you through multiple games. Gazencha says, having played the Lanterns app on the iPad, I'm planning on getting the physical version later. Woohoo! So there we have one score for the app actually working as a complementary marketing tool. So that's awesome. Good for our tabletop industry that we all love so much. And finally, we're going to have to wrap up with a post from Rusted Beetle, who says, the main reason for using apps to help learn the game, to make 2 or more player games workable as solo games, to play against non-local opponents. Until we get affordable 40-inch touchscreen tables with integrated game libraries like Steam, I don't think the popularity is going to shift to digital away from cardboard. And Rusted Beetle there, in your comments, you've kind of encapsulated our entire discussion beautifully within those easy to pronounce comments. So I appreciate that. And I hope that you are right in that while we see increased integration and improved quality of integration of board games into of apps into board games, I hope that the video gamification of boarding type games does not ebb and evaporate away. But only time will tell. And speaking of time, I think I ran out of words about 20 minutes ago, so my mouth is no longer doing exactly what my brain tells it to do. So I think that this might be a good point for us to wrap up today's discussion. I want to thank everyone who's taken the time to pop into the chat. Again, I'm looking at the chat window, and it looks like we got about halfway down through the chat, and there was a lot of hashtags in there today. So thanks everyone, new and old, that came by and participated in the chat. Like I said, this show wouldn't work without the without everyone being involved. Okay, I'm going to go not talk for a while, but hopefully I'll be better again this time next week, when I hope that you'll join me for another episode of The Metagame. Until then, I've been Chaz Marler, thanking you guys, and I will talk to you again real soon.